The biggest myth is that TikTok is the hot new channel, which is, I am convinced that it's wrong. And now the data is starting to support that, actually. Like we talked about the data at the beginning of this pod. But I think that the second biggest myth, right behind the TikTok one, is there's this thing right now that people are talking about called creative testing. So in the advertising world right now, the hot new thing is like, oh, you need to test a bunch of creatives, right? And I think that the reason that this myth exists is because when you no longer have as many levers on other types of testing or other ways to improve your ROI, you go to the one thing that you feel is in your control, which is, okay, I can build a new creative. I know I control that.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Rishabh Jain, and Rishabh and I are going to talk a little bit about e-commerce, ad technology, privacy implication on ads, Facebook versus TikTok, Google search versus YouTube ads, and maybe even a little bit about Google discontinuing or going to discontinue. I can't remember if they have or not yet. Third-party cookies, and so should be a great discussion. And if you're looking to learn a little bit more about e-commerce in general and ads, it'll be a great episode. So, with that much as a introduction, welcome on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I feel like we have now set ourselves up to, like, we've promised a lot, I guess, in the episode. So we've set ourselves up to have to deliver against a pretty wide promise. I think, we were chatting before the show and said, like, hey, these seem like some good topics. And now hearing you say it all together at the start, I'm like, all right, let's do this. It's a healthy amount of content, but I think we can do it.
Hey, I think we'll have a good conversation, get as deep and as far into it as we can, and go from there. So, well, with that, before we dive into the actual topics of conversation, just as a reminder to the audience, so Shab has been on the Inventive Journey, which is a sister podcast of this one. So if you want to go hear his full journey, definitely make sure to go check out his episode there. But for those that haven't, or either saying, "Hey, haven't had a chance to check it out," I just want the quick version of it. Go ahead and introduce yourself a bit to the audience.
Yeah. So I guess the very quick version, and then we're going to spend a bunch of time diving in. So the very quick version is I'm currently the CEO of Format Commerce. We're basically an embedded commerce company. And prior to this, I used to lead the new business teams at a company called LiveRamp, which is a middleware ad tech company. And so spent a bunch of time really understanding what it means to do customer acquisition in the online world. And specifically, as you outlined, around things like user privacy, what is Apple doing, what's Google doing, and so have a really deep insight onto those topics, which is actually what led us to building Format and sort of building an ecosystem that has embedded commerce as opposed to, today's world, which is redirected commerce, right? So that's the very quick summary on me. Once upon a time, I was also a scientist. I got my PhD in physics, but for now, I am a deeply invested sort of open web and customer acquisition person.
Awesome. Well, no, that's definitely a great introduction and a good segue to the conversation. So, well, maybe in no particular order, but just by way of conversation. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about today is, e-commerce maybe in general, but even more specifically, I think about ad tech. And there's a lot that you could dive in there as far as which platforms to use and how to decide it, and privacy implications, and Google search versus YouTube versus Facebook versus TikTok, and use of cookies and all of that. But so maybe to kick things off, just as a general idea is to step back just a little bit from that. If you were kind of talking to a lot of startups and small businesses and they're kind of looking at ads or technology or using a service or doing it themselves or which platforms. And it just kind of becomes, I think, a little bit overwhelming as to where do you even start and who do you find? Because, at least in my very limited experience, there are some awesome people out there and there are plenty of charlatans as well. And if you haven't been through it or you don't know what you're doing, it can be a little bit overwhelming because you don't know what you don't know. And so it's kind of, how do you go about even beginning to tackle the idea of ads and ad tech and what you should do? And then we'll dive into a little bit more of the specifics.
Okay, so I'm glad that that's where we're starting, because I have I think what's a pretty hot take on this topic. So a lot of people in the last year have been saying, hey, TikTok is now the new hot thing. And my belief is like, it is not. It is not the new hot thing. And in fact, earlier this morning, so we're recording this on December 12th, but so that I just want to give people some ability to find this later if they're interested. But earlier this morning, there's this data set that got released that I retweeted that showed actually the decline of the growth of TikTok at one of the highest rates of all social platforms. So the decline was 33%, I think, quarter over quarter, which is pretty dramatic. On top of that, there is a massive decline in spend on TikTok from the brands. Okay, so now actually getting to your question of like, where do you start with customer acquisition? I think, whether or not you like the person, Mark Zuckerberg, Meta is by far one of the best ad platforms ever built, and Google search ads. These are the two best ad platforms ever built. And so if you're going to start with some sort of paid acquisition strategy, that is where you should start. Don't try to do this thing of like, oh, I got to figure out TikTok and oh, this other newfangled thing, that other newfangled thing. Don't do it. just go to the top two, unless you're like great at content. Okay, this is like a totally separate issue, which is the other amazing way to acquire customers is content. So, I mean, you're doing this pod, right? And let's just be honest, like this pod is probably a great customer acquisition channel, right? Because great content leads to high trust, which it should, which leads to business, right? So, but if you're not talking about content and you're talking about sort of like paid media, Facebook and Google is where you should start, and really make sure you understand why those platforms are amazing before you adventure into other things like, LinkedIn or Twitter. Or, I mean, look, if you can get TikTok to work, good for you. It's actually not a performance channel.
So now you hit on it, and I know it wasn't necessarily the topics we did discuss a little bit beforehand, but it raised a question, because I do think, and and I assume it's probably I'll get a biased answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, there is a question as to, should you go pay ads or should you go content? In other words, should I just create really interesting content and go all organic, or should I go for paid ads? And there's obviously some trade-offs, and at least in my mind, but and then we'll dive into the different platforms, which you just did. But if you're to look at paid ads versus content and organic, and should I just try and make viral videos or even niche videos or create a channel? Thoughts? Should you do one, both? If you don't have the time and bandwidth to do both, which one should you do? And I know that's like 20 questions in one, so I'll pause there and see which or see if or what your thoughts are on it.
I think making good content is really hard. It's really hard. So, I think like people are just like, oh, I just need to turn on Zoom and like buy a mic and I can make a podcast. Like, man, I feel like you could tell them how that's just not correct. You know what I mean? There is a lot of work that goes into making great content. And so I think that if you're going to sign up to do content, you better have a point of view that you are actually good at it. And that doesn't mean you have to do a pod, just to be clear. You don't have to do a pod. You could do like great TikTok content. You could do great blog content. You could do great Twitter content, right? Different people are good at different types of content. You could do great LinkedIn content. But I think you should actually just be honest with yourself as to whether or not you are good at the type of content that the people who are engaging on that platform are choosing to engage with, right? So, and if it's a platform with an algorithm, like, yes, you should game it, right? Like, to the extent that you can game an algorithm, be my guest. But at a minimum, you should actually produce content that the people on that platform are choosing to engage with. And so that, I think like content, my view is like, yeah, do it, but be honest with yourself as to whether or not you're actually good at it. But paid media, it's formulaic. It's like a machine. You put $1 in, you get X dollars out. And so I think like the average person, if I didn't know anything about them, I would be like, hey, the paid media side is probably more reliable. So, if you're going to go content long term, make sure you understand what type of content you're great at. But in the meantime, you probably just want to like put $1 in, get $2 out, and just do that for a while, get your business up and going, and then switch over to content.
No, and I think that makes perfect sense. And I think it is, you get a false sense of security because you just see all the viral videos and they get tons of views and they get all these, SEO, and you hear all the stories of people just put out these things. And I agree with you. I think content is it can be worthwhile as a long-term strategy, but it is hard. One, to find your voice, two, to find content that resonates, and three, it just takes a while to typically to build that up. Now, there's always the exception to the viral video or viral content. But I think for every one of those viral videos and viral content, there's a million other people that don't have the viral video and viral content, and it is a much slower build. So now as we go to the paid content, again, these aren't even the ones that we were going to hit on, but I just have so many questions that I want to ask. But because it's one that I hit in a much different thing, which is DIY culture. In other words, people will ask me all the time is, hey, there are legal, LegalZoom or other ones, or I can just do it myself, or there's YouTube videos and everything else. And so I can just do it myself and I'll save myself the time and expense. And, usually I tell them all the horror stories and all the reasons why that's a bad idea, but it's still out there and it's still there. So when you're looking at ads and figuring out, what your ad spend should be, which platforms to do it on, how you should do your ads, is it doable to do? Is it doable and or advisable to do it yourself, or should you just hire an expert right out of the chute? And how do you, or any thoughts on hiring an expert? And I get it's probably a biased answer because it's just like asking an attorney, should you hire an attorney for legal work? They're always going to say yes, but any thoughts on that?
So I always take the point of view that it is faster and cheaper to hire somebody who knows what they're doing if they agree to teach it to you while they are doing it. So I don't know what, like, how you operate, but my view, like, so for example, we have lawyers for largely for securities, right? So as a startup, raising money, so largely security law, right? But I guess the way that I chose to work with them is, hey, just know that I'm going to want to understand, right? So like whenever I work with any sort of service provider, I always say, hey, you're working on, like, you are going to be the one doing it. Like I'm not asking you to teach me and then I'm going to do it. Like you're going to do it, but I also want you to spend the time to teach me. And so that's my general point of view is do not DIY, but have the ability to DIY at any point in time. And so like that's my view. So like for us, for our ads, we hire somebody else to run them, right? But at every point in time, we ask them how they do it. And actually places where we slipped and did not do it by mistake, we are now regretting because it's coming to bite us and it's biting us hard. So, it's like things were set up in ways in which make no long-term sense because of, not actually pushing on this notion of we must know how you are doing it and what decisions you are making to get there. So.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And, and I think it is, I like it. I'll put the one exception because I like the piece of advice, but I do think you have to be willing to pay the person for their time if they're going to teach. In other words, if you just want them to do it.
Oh, so actually, because so I agree with you, but I not only do I agree with you, I double agree with you. So the typical ad buyer, what they will do is they will charge you a percent of ad spend, but then they're not going to spend the time to teach you. So instead, what did we do? We said, hey, we'll pay you by the hour, which most ad buyers will not do. The reason is precisely because I want to be incentive aligned for you to sit there and teach me. Right.
Yep.
So we will agree on a different model of charging because I want you to teach me. Yeah.
No, and
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
right there with
so
you. And I think you just have to have that understanding that a lot of times, whether it's in a lot of fields, whether it's ad buyers or anything else, they are going to say, hey, our normal model is not set up to take hours or walk you through. Not that we don't do a good job, but it does take an additional amount of time to walk you through an answer and explain things and why you're doing this, because it takes most people, they build up their experience over a long period of time, things that are intuitive to them that they've already learned, they've been implementing for a long period of time. Now, when you come and ask them all those things, they know why they do it and they can explain it, but it takes time that they typically don't build into if it's like a flat fee or a percentage base, because they're saying that's where they're setting their time. So I think it just is a good, good takeaway is to say, now let's, I love the idea of making sure they teach you along the way, but you need to understand that that's not going to be for free. So well, let's get into a little bit of the technologies, and you started to hit on it, or already hit on a little bit of Facebook versus TikTok, but maybe we go to a different one, which is YouTube versus Google search. And
ooh,
I think everybody knows Google search pretty well. Everybody knows both of them. Everybody uses YouTube all the time, and they know Google search. I think people are more understanding of Google search. People pay for ads, you always see the sponsored thing, and they're not as often as familiar unless they're more deep into it about YouTube ads. So how do you go about discerning which one you should do? Should you do both? What kind of content or ads or businesses, or kind of walk us through a little bit of Google search versus YouTube ads?
yeah. So this is my favorite thing to talk about right now. Well, I guess my second favorite thing, because my number one favorite thing is to tell somebody that TikTok is going to die and then watch their reaction, because like 100% of people that I have spoken to so far almost like don't agree with me. They're just like, dude, this is like, like TikTok is obviously on the rise. That's where Gen Z is and all this sort of stuff. But my second favorite topic is YouTube versus Google search. And the reason is the two advertising models are totally different. So, in fact, the most recent Google earnings call, or I guess Alphabet earnings call, because they break out YouTube revenue now, shows that Google search ads revenue went up, but YouTube started to decline. Okay. So it's like within the same company, you have opposite things happening. And the real question you have to ask is like, how is that possible? Right? Like this is the same company, they have the same tech, blah, blah, blah. It's because of totally different business models, totally different. So when you're in Google search, what you get advertised is actually context. So I search for a term. Let's just say I search for this is like actually super famous, like injury lawyer, right? So this is like the number one most bid on search term. Okay. It's like incredibly expensive to bid on that search term. And every advertised search result that comes on the top is like, yeah, it's based on your search. It doesn't matter whether you, Devin, search for it or I, Rishabh, search for it, right? Like they don't care at all who searched for that. Those people are bidding on that search term. It's based on the context. YouTube is exactly the opposite. So think about the last time you looked at a YouTube video. The ads that showed up before the video played had nothing to do with the video, had nothing to do with what you searched for to get to that video. And it's because what they're basing it on is who you are. So it's like, oh, Devin is watching this video. I know what I should do. I should show him an ad for podcast equipment, right? Even though he's watching a video about how do I fix my faucet or whatever, like totally unrelated things. Or for me, if I'm like watching a podcast on YouTube, something that I do, very commonly, before I see that, I get like a car ad, nothing to do with what I am watching. And it's because what they are doing is they're running the ad based on who I am as an individual. Now, underneath the hood of that, and I'll wrap this quickly so that way this isn't just a ramble for listeners, but underneath that, the reason why this is so important is these changes that have been getting made in the ad tech ecosystem, like Apple saying you cannot track users, Google saying we're going to remove the third-party cookie. Those are all things that reduce the amount of information you have on the individual. So it's like, I don't know much about Devin. I don't even know that it's Devin. I don't know much about Rishabh. I don't even know that it's Rishabh. And so the ad that I can show them is going to be totally random. And so then that reduces the likelihood that advertisers will spend on that channel, which then reduces the revenue for YouTube. Complete opposite for Google search. And so like we're seeing the ecosystem change in front of our eyes. And the best example of that is within the same company, one part is growing and the other part is not. And it's just like, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, wow, this is the easiest way to see the change that is happening.
No, I think that's interesting. So far to back up, because I think one or just to or dumb it down to my level, almost when you're talking about, it's almost two different types of searching, right? Or two different types of ways that they go about finding you or conveying the information. Google is really based on what are you searching for, what are the search terms, and then it pops up with the ads based on what is your search terms or what are you looking for, versus YouTube, as I understand it, is much more of it is or providing you videos based on you as an individual, not what you're looking or not what you're either previously viewed or currently viewing. Now, maybe they have a little bit in there as to help to further define you as an individual, but it's not just, hey, what video did they search for? What are they looking for? Hey, they're looking for stupid cat videos. And so now I'm going to show them something about cats, but rather they're going to say, what is the information we have on this individual? Now, when you touched on it as well, that you said that they are changing their algorithms for privacy concerns or use of cookies, which is a lot of times how they can know about you even if they don't know exactly who you are. And so how will that change in cookies and privacy information? And I think the EU is even more adamant about privacy versus the US. And so how do you go about, from an ad perspective, navigating that or keep an eye on it, or how does that impact things?
Okay. So there is this thing that I've got to look up, but I think that the EU in particular, as of last week, might actually be saying that any information based on the individual's data is no longer permitted to be used in advertising, whether it is first party or third party. So that means like the data that Facebook has about you that you voluntarily gave to Facebook, they cannot use for ads, right? That is like, I mean, I had to start there because this is like a net new change a week ago that nobody in America is thinking about. Okay. But if we in America get to that point, it changes everything about the consumer web. Okay. And like, like, this is like the data geek is like very interested and excited about these things. And most other people are not going to care at all, but it is something worth looking up for people who are listening, is look up the EU privacy ruling, Facebook, personal data, right? So just look that up and you'll find a bunch of articles for early December. Okay. So now getting back to your original question around like, what are the rest of the changes that are happening in the ecosystem? So Apple also made a privacy change saying you cannot follow users from one website to another. Google is going to make a change end of next year, removing the piece of technology that allows you to track users from one website to another, which is called a cookie. So right now you have to sit there and click saying, hey, I accept cookies in a third-party context. By the end of next year, Google is going to remove the cookies entirely. So you're not even going to have a choice. Even if you wanted people to track you, they're not going to be able to track you. So this is like a very fascinating time for us to be living in terms of the changes on the privacy side.
So just, maybe to extend it out there, just curious where you think it's headed. So let's say D-Day, worst case scenario, the US follows in the way of the EU and significantly reduces the ability to use cookies, or just outright bans them and just says you can't use cookie. Private or private data is just that, private, and you can't use it to target ads. How is that going to, or where do you think they're going to go from there? Because I think that's where a lot of it is built around. And so how do you even adjust if you were those platforms? Just more out of curiosity than anything.
Dude, this is a multi-trillion-dollar question. This is not a $1 million question. This is like the revenue of Google plus the revenue of Facebook plus the revenue of Snapchat plus the revenue. It's like this is the consumer internet. Okay, and this is what I think people don't when they think about these changes, they think like, oh, Facebook is creepy and my ads are going to be less relevant. It's like, no, 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 no. You don't understand how big of a change this is. This is like the entire consumer internet was built on the idea that you can aggregate demand and that you can offer products for free because people will, quote unquote, subsidize them by being targetable in a way that they did not used to be previously, right? And so like the internet was built this way, the consumer internet at least, not the business internet, but the consumer internet was built this way. And so like when I as a consumer now go to any website and do any activity, I go in with all of these assumptions pre-built, right? It's like, oh, of course search is free. Of course Facebook is free. Of course this game is free. Of course this is, it's like my entire behavioral expectation set is that, things on the internet are free to distribute and therefore free to consume, right?
Yeah.
But it's just not right. so I think the thing that so I'll try my best to give you my point of view on what I think is actually going to happen and actually answer your question instead of just saying like, man, what a good question, and like totally evade it like a politician, right? So my best opinion on what actually happens is two things. One is, first, we will swing in the other direction completely. Okay. So much like how the election of Donald Trump, agnostic of your politics, was a swing from the prior point of view, the internet privacy will swing and say, we don't want people tracking, we don't want people using it, and then they'll swing dramatically. And then we'll start to experience what the impact of that is. So things will start to become paid for. Our ads will start to increase in volume and start to become like completely irrelevant to what we actually care about. And then we'll just all of a sudden be like, now this is more expensive. I still have ads, but they're just shittier, right? And that's what the consumer experience will be. And then like it'll take another 5 to 10 years and we'll swing somewhere in the middle. But I think that that's what's going to happen. What we do about it is a more interesting question. I think like what we do about it is, look, obviously I'm biased. I started a company because I think this is such an important question, but I think that we're going to see way more context dependent opportunities. So Google search is obviously the king of context dependent properties. Amazon search is the queen of context dependent properties, right? Where it's like you start almost every search on Google, you start almost every product search on Amazon. And these are the best contexts in the world. Now, right underneath that is content, where it's like, I am reading content, I'm enjoying content. And so what is the thing that is, so imagine if YouTube, now the ad was actually relevant to the video that you were watching. So let's just say you're looking up like, I don't know, how do I fix my faucet? The video that we, proclaimed that you were watching earlier in the in the chat. And it's like, okay, maybe what I should do is I should just put up ads for like plumbers, right? It's like, hey, if you're looking at videos for how to fix your faucet, and if you fail at that, then I have shown you relevant ads based on the context. I don't need to know who you are. I don't need to know anything about you, but I'm now showing you something relevant to the content, right? So I think that that's actually the what do we do about it is we start to see this idea of like very rich content dependent advertising become way more used as opposed to person dependent advertising.
Interesting. No, I think that's an interesting takeaway. I mean, it's one where it does seem that the pendulum will swing or tends to swing back, where we don't care at all about privacy and big tech has all of our data, and then we start to worry, hey, we're getting a little bit too intrusive, and so then the pendulum swings back, and it takes quite a long time to settle to where people are the pendulum somewhere in the middle, to where it's enough privacy that people are comfortable and enough information that it makes it usable. But it does feel like the pendulum is swinging back the other way, so it'll be a fun or an interesting area to see how it continues to develop. So Well, look, we're already towards the end of the podcast. We have so many more things to talk about. I'm sure we'll have to have you back on to this or this podcast or another one of our sister podcasts to continue to have some fun conversations. But now, as we do wrap up towards the end of this episode, I always like to end with one question, which is, within your industry, what is the biggest myth and why is it wrong?
Oh man, I feel like I dropped the lead on this one, which is the biggest myth is that TikTok is the hot new channel, which is, I am convinced that it's wrong. And now the data is starting to support that, actually. Like we talked about the data at the beginning of this pod. But I think that the second biggest myth, right behind the TikTok one, is there's this thing right now that people are talking about called creative testing. So in the advertising world right now, the hot new thing is like, oh, you need to test a bunch of creatives, right? And I think that the reason that this myth exists is because when you no longer have as many levers on other types of testing or other ways to improve your ROI, you go to the one thing that you feel is in your control, which is, okay, I can build a new creative. I know I control that. And so I think people will always, when you see that there's massive uncertainty, what you will quickly see follow massive uncertainty is like everybody starts to revolve around a thing. And that thing is always, as if it's magic, a thing that is controllable, right? And it's like, hey, actually, it's probably not the case that it's a controllable thing that is going to be the most impactful. What if it's something that's not in your control that's the most impactful, right? It's probably more useful to be upfront and honest about that so that you can at least try to influence that outcome, even though it's not in your direct control. But instead, you end up with these perversions where like humans like to feel in control of things. And so it's like, oh yeah, creative testing is the thing to do. I think it's a total myth. I don't think that creative testing is the thing to do. I in fact think that it's like going to be totally automated by the platforms, and that actually that there's some other variable that matters right now. Obviously, because of what I'm building, I think that that's actually the shopping experience, not the creative. But that those are my top two: TikTok and creative testing.
All right. Well, those are two great myths to dispel, and definitely a great piece of advice. So now, as we wrap towards the end of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah, so I'm just Rishabh M. Jain on either LinkedIn or Twitter. And then our company is formatcommerce.com. So, reach out to me on either LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm pretty active on both of those platforms. But if you're interested in learning more about us, of course, go to the company's website. Yeah, thanks, Devin.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on, sharing some great piece of advice and giving us a lot to think about. So, with that, we'll wrap up the episode. Thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share or you want to be a guest on the podcast, go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review. It helps us to share all this great expertise with even more startups and small businesses that are out there. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup, your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.